Hi, good evening, Prof.
Hello.
Hi, I can hear you.
Oops, there we go. Mhm.
Hello and greetings, everyone. So I think it's about time we start. And this is one of the interesting segments because whenever we want to wrap up our program with regards to Afrolongevity, I think Dr. Hodgins is always the best to do that for us because he has been with us in Afrolongevity, TFFDS. In fact, when I wanted to launch, when I coined the term Afro Longevity and wanted to launch Afro Longevity, I discussed the idea with him, and he was able to articulate some of the documents which he sent back to me that helped me in starting the right way. So before I get into the conversation proper, some of us do not know this enigma here. And Professor Edward Hodgins is the founder of the Human Achievement Alliance. He is a political scientist. He's a futurist. He's a philosopher. And one of the interesting aspects of it is that he's put with in the same school with one of my mentors, the Catholic University, Washington, D.C. And he's a very passionate futurist, and he served as the director of Heartland Institute. Before at Heartland, he served in various roles at the Atlas Society, where he did a whole lot. But one of the interesting works that he was able to do is one of his best-selling book, The Republican Party's Civil War. Will freedom win? And some of his other books include Freedom to Tread, Refuting the New Protectionism, The Last Monopoly, Privatism, and a whole lot. He is he is also in the advisory board of TFFDS and Afro Longevity, doing so much for humanity, did a lot of research in Africa. And I would like to now yield the mic to Professor Hodgins and then allow him to tell us a little bit about himself, his contribution in Afro Longevity, TFFDS. I will be working and then get into the conversation proper. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you for that kind introduction. I was just going to say thank you for setting up this program And I want to mention to the students here how lucky you are to be in this program that's been put together by this intelligent, caring, and so entrepreneurial and individual. Osa Nakachi is a role model. And, you know, if you look at the way he is going after these issues and his passion, this is something this is someone you should learn from as well as learn with. By the way, I was in Africa in, I think it was 1990. And this is, by the way, I got this from a Tanzanian group that was promoting business among small business owners and the like. It was a very interesting trip to Africa. I went to Kenya as well, by the way, on that trip. And one of the first things I did about Africa, I'll just mention this before we get into our discussion today, is I wanted to ask the question why Asia grows and Africa doesn't. And because in one sense, they started off, a lot of the Asian countries started off in the same place as African countries. Some of them were colonial possessions. Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea was, of course, all of Korea was occupied by the Japanese for quite a long time, Taiwan. And so what happened after World War II, when they were all in about the same level of economic development, and how did Asia get so far ahead? And what I did was I did a study, and I looked at, I called it Why Asia Grows and Africa Doesn't. And what I found is that if the sub-Saharan African countries minus South Africa, because at the time when I did that study, it was kind of a separate case, and I looked between 1965, which is when a lot of the African countries were getting independence from colonial rulers, and 1985, 65 to 85, a nice 20-year track there. And I found out that if the African countries had grown economically at the rate of the four Asian tigers, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and South Korea, instead of going from about $500 per capita to about $500 per capita, because of course the population grew, and instead of having a GDP going from about $100 billion to $200 billion, but again, it's wiped out by population growth, they would have gone from $500 per GDP per capita to $1,800, with GDP growing from $100 billion to $640 some billion dollars, because of economic liberty and unleashing the creative abilities of the Asian populations. And so I want to start actually with something about that, because I'm in the United States and I'm in the state of Maryland. This is right outside of Washington, D.C. And we have a disproportionate number of Africans who are physicians, healthcare workers, and the like in this area, including a lot of Nigerians, by the way. And in recent years, my now late parents, I'm sorry to say, were treated by doctors from Kenya, from Nigeria. We had one from Rwanda. I think we had one from South Africa. And this was wonderful for we Americans. We had all these Africans coming over here, taking these great jobs as professionals and helping us keep healthy. But then I asked the question, well, how come they're not in Africa helping fellow Africans? And that's going to be one of the topics I will touch upon in my talk today. But the topic today is geopolitics of wellness and medicine. And I want to start off by the opposite of the geopolitical realm. I want to start with the individual, local communities, local cultures, and countries. And the fact that you are in this seminar right now indicates that you take your own lives seriously, and that therefore you do and should take your own personal health seriously. That's where wellness starts. It doesn't start at the global level. It doesn't start even at the country level. It starts at the level of the individual. And I've seen our Osa Nakachi here, our friend Osa Nakachi, posting lots of things about diet, for example, looking at the different things that can be helpful and the different things that can be harmful. Exercise, keeping in good shape is important. Generally, good health habits are important. For example, getting enough sleep, which I'm sorry to say I don't. So I have to work on that a little bit. I have two kids, and kids can be a challenge. They're wonderful. I love them, but they can be a challenge. Don't smoke. Don't do dangerous things like that. Don't do the sort of drugs that get you addicted. These are obvious things, and so health starts with the individual. And I want to mention also psychological factors. Now, you might think that, well, what does that have to do with it? But all the research shows that things that keep you physically healthy are certain psychological things. For example, having a purpose in life, whatever it happens to be, hopefully a good purpose. For example, to help your own country or your own community become healthier, or to be a teacher. I consider myself a teacher. And so part of my purpose is to help educate and mentor students like yourselves and others. I work in Washington, D.C. on public policy, and I like to joke that I can explain something in such a simple manner that even members of the U.S. Congress can understand it. That's how good I am. But seriously, purpose is important. Social connections have been shown to be important to health, not just psychological health, but it does translate into physical health. Having, in fact, friends, being engaged with family and the like. So I don't want to downplay those things because, again, I'm talking about scientific research and not just my opinion, that having these psychologically good traits is something that will keep you healthy. It will keep you motivated about life. There are biological results and implications of these sorts of things. So that's the first thing I want to do, is talk about wellness as something that's for the individual and in a wider sense for the community. But I want to move on a little bit. When I talk about geopolitics, or when I talk, let's say, wellness and medication and medicine, and I talk about it in the context of Africa, the first thing I understand, and all of you understand, is Africa is perhaps the most diverse continent in the world, with multiple languages, multiple cultures, multiple religions, multiple environs, everything from crowded urban centers like Lagos to rural villages, often impoverished, unfortunately, without infrastructure, steaming jungles, and everything in between. It's so diverse. So talking about wellness in the context of Africa, really, it's like saying wellness in the context of Europe or whatever. I think the general principles apply, but you have to always look at what are the local issues. And I want to mention, by the way, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention it again, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is when I look at, one of the things I did when I was the Heritage Foundation, when I went to the trip to Tanzania and to Kenya, is I came up with the idea of an index of economic freedom. And the idea was to see if there's a correlation between economically freer countries and those that are not as economically free. And there was an extremely strong correlation between that. And unfortunately, the worst scores on economic freedom are in African countries, and especially in the indicator that concerns government corruption, bureaucracies, property rights, independent judiciary, things like that. And that's one of the things, unfortunately, that holds back African countries from having the prosperity and the wealth creation that you see in Asian countries and other places in the world. And what I'll be talking about a little bit later is that this really does impact healthcare and health, because if a country does not have the resources to take care of even the basics, it's going to be very difficult to have healthy individuals in a healthy country. But what I want to do first of all, second of all, or third of all, I lost track of my counting here. Sorry about that. Is because I'm a futurist, as is Osunakachi, I want to talk a little bit about health in the context of technology. That's the one thing that, of course, differentiates the world today and in the last 20 or 30 years from the world in the past. We went through an industrial revolution several centuries ago. Now we are in a technology revolution that's going to be just as profound and transformative. And in the healthcare area, probably the most transformative time in human history. And by the way, I want to recommend to you a book, Seizing Our Singularity Future, which I edited and was put out by the very organization that Osunakachi is running. So I've got a chapter in this book, and if any of you want a copy of my chapter, please contact me. I'm happy to give you just a copy of the chapter if you can't get the book. But the first thing I want to say about technology is you have to look at the basics. In some places in Africa, as well as other parts of the world, you don't have even the basics: plumbing, sanitation, reliable electricity, a reliable internet or cellular connection, or some way of contacting the outside world, so to speak, with your devices, or maybe don't even have the devices. So that's going to be a first thing for any country to grow those that basic infrastructure. But one of the interesting things about Africa and some of the other countries, for example, in South America, is that they can bypass many of the steps that the developed countries had to go through to get to the point of wealth that we have in the developed world. One of the examples I like to give from Latin America is I was in Argentina. This was in the late 1990s, I think. And Argentina, in Buenos Aires, it's really like a European city. It was settled mostly by Europeans. You go there and you think you're in Paris or something of the sort. I went to the downtown area where their financial district was and so forth. I looked overhead, and there were all of these wires strung between the buildings. It's like a jungle. It's like, well, what's the situation here? Well, the problem is that their electric grid was so bad that companies would simply string a wire from this window over across the street or down the block to that window, and that's how they communicated. Well, when Argentina and some of the other Latin American countries decided they needed to overcome those problems, instead of simply building more wires, they used wireless technology, which is the new thing. So in other words, they kind of had to jump over the step that we had to go through by just like, well, let's do a whole lot more wires. African countries can do that. And let me give you a few examples. Like there's one group of transhumanists that suggested maybe the way to help healthcare in Africa is to build 25,000 new brick and mortar hospitals. I think that is totally wrong, because we have now the technology that you don't have to do that. You can have diagnostics in local communities. There's a thing called a lab on a chip, where you can take a blood sample or some kind of sample like that, have it diagnosed right there, and then somehow electronically send it to a hospital or a research organization that can evaluate the situation of that patient immediately, instead of having to go miles into a hospital. The hospital is going to duplicate, of course, a lot of the structure that other places are going to be doing. Why not just do it this way? It's much, much more efficient, much less costly. So as you look at your own countries and your own regions, look at these kinds of things, again, where you can do local measurements like that. I'll give you another example. The Gates Foundation, this was founded by Bill Gates, who, of course, was the co-founder of Microsoft. His foundation came up with an interesting device. One of the problems, in a lot of rural areas is sanitation. And for health, that's going to be a very basic thing. Well, the Gates Foundation came up with a kind of a toilet structure that removes germs and so forth from human waste. It uses some of it as fertilizer. It uses some of it to produce energy, to produce clean water, to reuse the nutrients. And you can get the energy off the grid. Again, this is a very innovative way to do things. And the interesting thing is it costs far, far less than putting in a whole system of plumbing and the like. You can make a village or a small city might be able to do that eventually, but this is a way to use technology to bypass that very expensive step. Want to mention another. I want to move now to. I'm going to step outside of talking about Africa, because I want to talk about, and because I'm a futurist, I want to talk about two things. I want to give you a view of what is probable and what is possible right now, mainly in the developed countries, but eventually in your countries, to literally substitute a sick care system for a true healthcare system. Right now, all of our countries, including the ones in the developed world, have sick care systems, not healthcare systems. You get sick, you go to the doctors, perhaps, you get some treatments. Maybe the treatments work, maybe they don't work. Maybe you have to debate and argue about who pays the bills and how much. That's a sick care system, not a healthcare system. A real healthcare system is a system that prevents ailments to begin with. Now, this is where wellness comes in that we talked about earlier, that a lot of this is in your hands as individuals to try to live healthy lives. But I want to tell you about the trajectory that I see coming that I think is very inspirational. First of all, remember, healthcare is individual care. It's for me, Ed Hudgens. It's for OC there. It's for, I see a whole bunch of you others in the chat here. It's you as individuals. The doctor doesn't cure society. The doctor cares the individual sitting right in front of them, or treats the individual right in front of them. That's what healthcare is. It's the individual. And so there are 5 factors that can really show a path from sick care to true healthcare and longevity. Number 1 is data collection. In the United States right now, the year 2000, it cost, I think, $100 million to sequence a human genome. Today, it can be done for $200. I did mine for $400. I got the deluxe version. So I can look at my genome and I can see which ailments I'm susceptible to, where I might be able to, focus on having a better healthy heart or whatever it happens to be. We can also collect epigenetic information much cheaper. So more and more, we're getting the technology where we can evaluate you as a unique individual. That's the first thing. Number 2, more and more, almost every day, I see a new report about how we can analyze that data and that information. About 4 or 5 years ago, unfortunately, sadly, one of my nieces had a baby die at 3 months old from what's called sudden infant death syndrome. Very sad situation. Fortunately, she was able to have 2 more children, and one of them is 4 years old and one of them is like almost a year old, and they're absolutely delightful. But since then, doctors have looked at the data and discovered that the lack of a particular enzyme in babies is what makes them susceptible to this so-called sudden infant death syndrome. And of course, what that means is that physicians now can take a look at an embryo and say, uh-oh, it looks like it's susceptible because it doesn't have that enzyme. Let's try to introduce that enzyme so that the baby is not at risk to dying. We see those sort of things all day, and I could go do a whole session just on here are the ways that we can interpret that data. So that's number 2. Number 3, this is very important, is wearables that monitor us in real time. Now, I have my Apple Watch here. There are other kinds of monitors you can wear, Fitbits and so forth. I've got my Oura Ring here. More and more, especially in the developed countries, people are wearing these health trackers, and they're becoming more and more sophisticated in what they can look at, blood pressure, all these sorts of things. I wonder if I can show you on my phone the kind of cool stuff. I've got a smart scale, and it gives you these all sorts of neat stuff about my body mass in my different, my arms and my legs and my waist and all this kind of stuff. And it gives me very, very exact measurements. And, this is not only really cool, but the point is I'm keeping track of my health in real time. And in the not too distant future, we're going to have implants as well, where we can be looking at what's going on inside with things like cholesterol and the like. So that's the third thing, and that's going to be very important. The fourth thing is artificial intelligence. We're going to get to the point, and there's some clinics now that are doing this sort of thing. An artificial intelligence having all of my personal information is going to be able to diagnose me in real time, to look at me and to be able to say, perhaps years ahead of time, and there's a clinic actually that does this, Ed, it looks like you're going to have this problem. There's no symptoms right now, but in a year or two, you're going to have a particular problem with circulation, heart, whatever it is. And of course, what that means is that detecting the symptoms ahead of time means that we're not talking about sick care. We're actually talking about healthcare, because this is the fifth thing. Then doctors can intervene and try to deal with those problems before they manifest and before they become critical, perhaps using some of the new technology like genetic editing, so CRISPR-Cas9, CAR-T, some of these things you probably have heard in some of the other talks. That is the path that is possible, certainly in the developed world, to replacing sick care with real health care and longevity. And I suspect you've already heard lectures about the work being done to slow and to actually stop aging. But again, in a sense, you still have to live long enough to be able to do that. And that's where you come back to wellness. So, keep healthy. But what's in the way of this incredible future? What's in this incredible future? Well, I'll say four quick things here. First of all, unfortunately in the West, there's a growing fear of technology. And interestingly enough, you see more of that fear in the United States and in some of the European countries. Interestingly enough, France has one of the highest levels of fear about technology. This is the country that gave us Louis Pasteur, who of course was the great healthcare innovator. Also, interestingly enough, in the countries I've seen surveyed, especially the Asian countries, India and South Korea, young people especially are much more optimistic and accepting of technology. And I'm hoping that that is in fact the case in Africa, because this, of course, is going to be the path from sick care to real health care. The second thing, and this comes to one of the topics of this lecture, medication and medicine, the approval processes in all of the developed countries are not very good. We have a Food and Drug Administration in this country that is correctly supposed to make sure that we're not getting medication that's going to poison us. Fine, I don't want medication poisoning me or my children or anyone. However, it takes about 10 years and a cost of about $3 billion to get a new product from research lab to patient. And of course, a lot of that is because the research labs try this and try that, and it fails, and they have to try something again. Okay, that's the way research and development works. But a lot of it is because the Food and Drug Administration in this country and in other countries as well are rather antiquated. They were put together, and the certification requirements were put together before all of this new technology. And so that's one of the problems and before AI was being developed. And so right now there's a big move, and certainly in the United States and elsewhere, to try to figure out how to allow for quicker approval and to allow for approval in terms of these new approaches to cures. For example, if you're trying to come up with a treatment for aging, let's say for mitochondrial mutations, well, you're not going to be able to do that in a clinical trial where you have a group and you do it for 6 months and you see whether the thing works or not, because mitochondrial mutation takes place over many, many years. So we have to look, for example, endpoints or indicators that something might be working even before we see the results. So that's a big problem in all of our countries. Delivery systems also are a very serious problem in all of our countries. That is actually getting the medications to the patients. In the United States and in most of the developed world, doctor appointments only last for about 15 minutes. A lot of the problem is that there's so much paperwork. In the United States here, oops, in the United States here, for example, some doctors spend as much time filling out the paperwork and the government requirements and regulations as they do actually talking to the patients, which of course causes doctor and physician burnout as well. Those are the problems with the delivery systems. And finally, you have what are called legacy medical institutions that usually are looking backwards rather than forward. These are professional organizations, they're academic journals, those sort of things. And these are physicians and healthcare researchers and all who were trained 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. That's their mindset. It's hard for them to understand the new technology. One tragic example here in the United States, and I think in other countries, was during the AIDS epidemic, starting in the 1980s. Researchers fairly quickly knew that transfusions could also transmit the HIV infection. But it was several years before the medical establishment in the United States decided that they were going to screen blood regularly to make sure that they're not giving someone a transfusion with blood that's infected with HIV. Thousands of Americans and people in other countries died because of that. And it wasn't because we didn't know, it's just because the medical organizations just, well, that's not the way we learned it. We're suspicious about this. So those are some of the problems that we see today. Now I want to turn to geopolitics, since this is in the title that I'm supposed to be speaking about. Okay. And I'll start by saying this, and then I want to open up to questions because I love getting questions from people. When we look at health, wellness, medicine globally, there's a tendency to look for global standards, global mandates as kind of a path to wellness and better medicines. But I want to suggest that as important, if not more important, is competition between companies, researchers, providers, and regulatory regimes as well. Now, I note, first of all, that just like there's diverse cultures in Africa and diverse governments in Africa and so forth, we have diverse healthcare systems throughout the world. Some of them are completely government provided. In Canada, for example, the government provides all healthcare. It's through taxes. You don't go into the doctor's office and have to pay a fee. The government just covers all of that out of taxes. In some countries like the United States, most healthcare providers and hospitals and doctors are private entities. However, they're very, very heavily regulated by the government. And in many countries, you have a mixed system. I think in Israel, for example, there's a system where you have basic government provided or government paid for healthcare, but then you can buy supplemental insurance that will allow you to have other kinds of treatments. So they're mixed systems. So that's the first thing to understand when we talk about what are the geopolitical aspects of healthcare. But I want to say that all of the systems do have problems, as I've indicated. They have very, very long waits for services. For example, I mentioned that Canada, the government provides everything, and doctors essentially work for the government. And so healthcare is free. But one of the problems is that today, between the time a primary physician says you need to get some kind of advanced treatment or examination, and between when they actually get that examination is about 30 weeks. Now that's up from 9 weeks in 1993. So yeah, it's free, but guess what? You have to wait, and maybe you can't wait for 30 weeks. You have the same situation in the other developed countries, most of the other developed countries. United Kingdom, Great Britain, has a completely government-run system. And by their own measures, it's the worst system in the developed world in terms of weights, in terms of number of physicians per individual, and the like. And The United States, again, has a little bit of a better system in some ways. The waits aren't that long, but the cost can be very, very high. So we have all of these problems in the current systems. I want to also mention that some of the problems go beyond and I'm going to get to some of the solutions in just a moment. Some of the problems go beyond the very narrow medical fields that we tend to look at. I'll give you some interesting examples. In the year 2003, about 15,000 mostly elderly French people died during the summer because of the hot weather. They had a heat wave during that summer, and about 15,000 plus or minus died terribly too. $150 or $200 air conditioner, window air conditioner, could have saved all of them. But the French kind of had this thing, well, air conditioning, I don't know. And as you probably know, the same thing happened this summer, over 2 decades after the 15,000 people died in France, because there was a dogma against air conditioners. We talk about technology and dogmas against technology. And the fear was, well, the technology could contribute to global warming. But you see, this is how these things work. Which is more important, to have air conditioners that frankly don't produce a lot of pollution or anything like that, or have thousands of your own people die? And I want to hold up something for you here. The thing is, okay, I don't know if you can see this. If you take a look at how much, if some people are concerned about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you're going to say, well, what the hell does that have to do with healthcare? Well, you can see here that where is Africa in terms of producing CO2? You can't even measure it, can you? It's not barely even there. The big problems right now are China, India is coming up, the US is going down. But the point is that we have seen a lot of reactions against technology, artificial intelligence, data centers, and so forth, which are absolutely crucial to future healthcare because of this fear of global warming. When the problem isn't that Africa is the big problem, or some of these other European countries who are barely even register here, and it's some of the other countries. So the point is, when you talk about healthcare and health systems and so forth, you have to look at these other issues. For example, as I say, energy consumption, energy production. What are the impacts on things like artificial intelligence and the ability to use those to deal with diseases? So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the solutions. Okay. First, this is where international competition is kind of important. For example, during the COVID epidemic, but countries across the world and American states that had some flexibility tried different approaches to COVID and how to keep people healthy during the COVID epidemic. And Sweden, for example, did not have massive lockdowns like some of the other countries did. And interestingly enough, if you look at the statistics from Sweden, you see that they did just as well in terms of, preventing COVID as did the countries that had massive lockdowns. So there, instead of having a national or a global standard of everybody has to do this and this and this, there was experimentation. And you saw that Sweden did just as well by keeping their economy more open. And if you looked at American states, you saw something very similar, where experimentation showed that some approaches were worse, some approaches were better. In New York State, unfortunately, for example, the New York State government decided to keep people who had COVID confined, who were elderly, confined to their clinics. And unfortunately, everybody in the clinics got COVID as well. So you had higher death rates in New York City or New York State than you did in, say, Florida, where they didn't do that. Another interesting approach is competitions between regulatory regimes. Because as I mentioned earlier, we have a problem with all of the approval processes. And one of the things we see, well, I want to back up and say one other thing about competition. We see throughout the world medical tourism. What that means is, for example, we have lots of Canadians coming down to the United States because remember I talked about that 30-day or 30, sorry, 30, that long period of wait. What did I say it was? 30 weeks, sorry, 30 weeks wait to get treatment. Well, you know what a lot of Canadians do? They just drive down to the United States, pay out of pocket, and they get the treatment. Interestingly enough, there are certain kinds of basic procedures that are cheaper in Mexico. So you have medical tourists from the United States going to Mexico for certain treatments. You have Europeans going to India for certain treatments. You have a lot of them going to other Asian countries. Thailand and Japan are both trying to become tourist attractions for medical treatments. What that indicates is that rather than having a global standard, well, let them compete. And then what happens, so ideally, for example, is the Canadians will say, well, you know, our system isn't doing that well. Maybe we should learn from the Americans. And the Americans saying, you know what, why is it that we have so many people going to Mexico for certain treatments? Maybe we should look at changing our system. Another approach, and I'll just mention this, and I want to stop because I want to get a few questions, is, for example, there's a bill before the U.S. Congress. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas put this forward. It's called the Results Act. And what it says is that if you have a treatment, some kind of a medical treatment that has been approved by the agency in one of the developed countries, basically the European Union, UK, Switzerland, I think Japan is on there, Australia. If it's approved by those countries, but then it can be used in the United States. That's putting pressure on the United States Food and Drug Administration to say, hey, we better catch up. We better get our process more efficient, because otherwise what you have is a lot of American medical researchers are going to go to Switzerland and say, let's just get it approved in Switzerland. It's better to do it that way. It's quicker, it's cheaper, it's safe. And then we'll bring it back to the United States. See, that's competition. Anyway, I've gone on a lot, and sorry, I'm very passionate about these things. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there, but I'll just add at the end two things. Number one, again, pay attention to your personal health. That's where you have the most influence is on you, okay? And number two, you have my contact information, or Osa Nakachi can certainly give that to you. And so if you want to follow up with me, that would be great. I can always send you the chapter that I did in this book, and I can send you the chapter that I just did in this book on from sick care to healthcare. So I can send you both of those chapters if you wanted to follow up. I can give you other references as well. So again, thank you for your attention, and I really love talking to students, and you guys are the vanguard, okay, of the revolution that's coming in healthcare and longevity. So congratulations. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, let Osa Nakachi figure out how to put you on a speaker, unless you were all so blown away or traumatized. You can't ask questions. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, let me see here. I'm just trying to look.
Yeah.
I see the microphone going. Oh, okay, it looks like it's open now. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Professor Hodgins, for your time and for making out for being here to share with us. It's been an amazing journey with you since 2020, and now we've been pushing and doing this project together, developing courses together, teaching institutions, and then giving you some of our products in the States during Revolution Against Aging and Death Festival, Rad Fest, right? So we're now open for questions, comments, and other things. But before we get into that, I had wanted you to talk a little bit about the corruption in Africa and how it is inhibiting
hmm
health progress, and
hmm
why Africans
hmm
are very low, and then how the West also try to control Africa. Because I think you are in a
Yes,
better position to talk about that. Thank you.
yes, absolutely. I had a piece in my chapter in this book where, again, the index of economic freedom was a concept I came up with, and some of my former colleagues uh, uh, worked out the details. And what I did in this my chapter in this book is I looked at, I can't find the page right now, the level of corruption. This is measured. This isn't just, well, Ed says that it's corrupt over there. We tried to measure the level of corruption in the sub-Saharan African countries. And if 100 is the least corrupt, the African countries on average were like 23 or 22 or 23. Really, really bad. Meaning that if you want to get something approved or have an economic project approved or what have you, you have to know the brother-in-law of the minister of the whatever it is. You have to pay bribes. That's not a free market. That doesn't say that the best wins. It says the person who has the most influence or or who has the most money to pay bribes wins. And that is why, that's one of the reasons, by the way, why, as I say, we have so many Africans right here in my state providing health care for me and my family rather than in Nigeria or Rwanda or wherever. Corruption is the most serious issue associated with low productivity and low entrepreneurship. An entrepreneur is someone who goes out and just does something with a minimal regulation from government. One of the cliches that's a true cliche in this country is, for example, the people who developed the basic computer chips worked in a garage. The guys who created this, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, started out working in their garage. They didn't have regulations. They didn't fill out paperwork. They just went ahead and said, we're going to do this damn thing. And then eventually they had to incorporate, of course. But that's a major, major problem. And what it does is it also drains talent. Instead of the folks on this call, on this seminar, thinking about how can I best, help my own, how can I best help my own community? How can I best work on some of these issues, infrastructure, whatever? How can I find the best way to do it? You have to think about, how can I get permission? Who do I have to bribe? Who do I have to suck up to? Who do I have to have influence with so they can have influence with, and so forth and so on? And I'll mention also that if you look where most of the investment goes from certainly the Western countries, it's in countries or regions that very strongly protect private property rights, where you don't have to go through these kinds of government mechanisms. And that includes places like Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the special economic zones in China, by the way. China is a very mixed economy. It's a communist economy in some ways. It's incredibly inefficient and corrupt. But in other areas, the Chinese are smart enough to say, we're going to let foreigners come in, put their money in there, build their factories, without, with minimal regulations. Obviously, you want safety regulations. That's important. But that's the problem with corruption. And one of the ways you folks on this call can help is not only to point these things out, but to try to work with the people in your communities and in your social circles and so forth to say, look, we have a bad system. We all know it's a bad system. And we have to realize that we need to change it. We need to try to make it a political issue, for example, perhaps at the local level, perhaps at the higher level, to say, look, if people really care, if political people really care in Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, Kenya, wherever it happens to be, Tanzania, if you really care about the people, here's what you have to do. You have to look at, again, why Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan grew rich, and why we, with intelligent people who come to the United States and flourish, can't do that in your own countries. You have to be the leaders in that area as well, the moral leaders, to take the moral high ground.
Okay.
It's going to be difficult,
Thank
by
you.
the way, but
Yeah.
you know, that's the path.
All right.
And so I thought I saw
Questions.
another.
Question. Time for questioning, please.
Okay, thank you,
Something
Prof.
popped up.
From here,
Go
good evening.
Not
ahead.
hearing it right now.
Good
Okay.
evening, Prof. Thank you for the lesson. Okay, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is based on what Mr. Osinakachi asked, and I want to get more clarity. Okay, you talked about the corruption in Nigeria, and you talked about the healthcare system moving from the sick healthcare system to a healthy healthcare system. So I want to know, won't the healthcare system be something that, you know, the NGOs, can they take it upon themselves to move the healthcare system from that of the, you know, the sick healthcare system to that of a healthy healthcare system? I mean, the NGOs, without the government being involved in it. Because as we know, the system is corrupt, and it won't just take a person or it won't just take an individual to change the system. It has to take an organization or a group of persons coming together to say no to the corrupt system. So what do you think about Prof?
Okay, well, that's very important. If the question is how do you change the system when right now you already have a corrupt system, so how do you get around this system? Would that be a good way to phrase the question?
Yeah, that's a nice way to phrase the question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, what I would say is this. I'd have to know a little bit more about the particulars of whether it's Nigeria or, again, I've been to Kenya and some of the other places. I'd have to know about some of the differences. But this is where, first of all, non-governmental organizations come into play. And in many cases, you're talking about, for example, churches, religious organizations. I'm not sure about the level of development of certain kinds of social organizations in Nigeria, but that's where these kinds of organizations, as well as nonprofits, can help. I want to say something I didn't say in my talk, but in the United States here, there's something happening that's going to surprise everybody. And I've talked about our bad system here. And the disruptors are very likely to be three commercial organizations: Amazon, which basically delivers packages; Walmart, which is a big store, chain of stores; and CVS, which is a chain of pharmacies. And many of them now are buying up private physician systems and setting up their own little systems that you can subscribe to, maybe pay a fee every year and have some sort of deductible. And they're setting up their own systems kind of outside of the current system. There's another group that has about 6 facilities right now. It's going to hopefully have more. It's called Fountain Life. I visited their facility in Florida. Now, this is very expensive, but you'll see where this is going. This is a private group that you have to pay a lot of money for initially, and they give you every kind of imaginable test: MRIs, X-rays, gene sequencing, blood tests, you name it. And they tend to find pre-symptomatic conditions that they can cure before they become a serious problem. The problem is, and they use artificial intelligence to give you individual treatment. The problem is it's very expensive. And right now we have an insurance system that doesn't really allow that to be insured for. So I'm looking at ways that we can unleash those groups. But something I'd like to perhaps follow up with you and maybe Osi on is a strategy for doing this sort of thing in, if it's Nigeria, where you're at, doing it in Nigeria, where you work with some of these local organizations, local communities, local town councilors or city councils, local churches. That's one of the ways you can create a grassroots movement, we like to say in this country, that forces the political leaders to come to grips with these things that are harming every single person in the country.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. So we
Mm-hmm.
need to really mobilize. I think one of the things that I always mention when we started the Gen 4 IR, you know, we started the Gen 4 IR revolution, and we started doing things like take the scientific awareness campaign that we started with Rwanda. And I always advise and encourage people that in Africa and in other places where revolution took place, either um, biomedical revolution or any other form of revolution, is to build a system that makes the existing system obsolete. If you start by fighting the existing system, you might not live to witness your idea, because the transitional system is quite transactional and they place profits over life. So if you want to do a revolution and it is something that you want to achieve, you need not to go confrontational. You need to build yours in parallel. There will be people that might be interested in what you're doing. Just remain consistent and do constructive criticism, which is part of the project, the Afrolongevity project, and something that I'll be starting soon. Always that I've been witnessly. So yeah.
Yeah.
My
By the way,
cents.
This is a very important point you make about whether you do confrontation or whether you do I'm not a Marxist, okay? Marxism has failed everywhere, but they had an interesting strategy called the Long March Through the Institutions. Rather than going in the streets and screaming and burning down buildings and waving flags, they would embed themselves into institutions and then corrupt from the inside. We can do the same thing for the good and basically work within institutions, local communities and all. By the way, you're right about the West coming in and in many ways having the wrong models and saying, well, it works in France, let's try it here. In some cases where they built railroads, well, that was certainly a good thing, but in other cases, it certainly was not. By the way, I want to give you one other interesting example of something happening in the United States. We have a system that's a fee-for-service system. I go to the doctor treats me or gives me medicine, and then either myself or my insurance company pays for each visit or each treatment, right? And so the incentive for the doctor is, well, if we can give Ed 6 treatments and have 6 visits, we make twice as much as with 3 visits and 3 treatments. There's a thing called capitation, and you can read about it, especially in this particular book. Capitation is where a medical practice, you give them an annual fee, and then to earn that annual fee, they have to give you everything. They have a financial incentive to keep you healthy and to keep you from getting sick to begin with, rather than saying, hey, if Ed gets sick and we give him 6 treatments instead of 3, we make twice as much money. So even looking at how the profit incentives are set up is something that's very important.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Question, comments? Do we still have questions and comments? Okay. I think we
Oops.
okay.
By the way, I'm going to put my email. You can send along my email to the people so that if they want to contact me, they can do
Nancy
that.
want to ask a question. Go ahead,
Oh, sure.
Dr. Nancy.
Hello, Prof. Thanks so much for the expose.
Hello, doctor.
Yeah, I founded an institution in Ghana, and we are looking at health from the angle you are describing, where we can look at the DNA and predict what can befall you in 2, 3, or 4 years and work to mitigate it with you, with the patient. And we use a technology that is able to access what is on the background from the hair, the human hair, or the urine, or your nails. And the information it gives is explicit. So it will give information about cancer that is developing, your lipid profile that is going to lead to a cardiovascular disease, whether you are going to get dementia. And we work with our patients to sort of prevent them. Here is the case. Our system is different. So some people think that, no, this is too sophisticated. It may be non-ethical. How can you read into the future? Now, you said that US have companies that are able to do that, and they help people to mitigate against these things. But here in Africa, when you use the substance that will give you the right information, like the hair or the nail, they sort of believe that it's too strange and maybe non-ethical. How do you help them to embrace the idea? Because this prevents the problem from coming in the first place.
That is a really excellent question. I think I had a similar question in one of the other seminars that in which I participated. And a lot of that has to do with, again, the nature of the particular beliefs. We have in this country, and I wrote about this 10 or 12 years ago, we had surveys of people about what would they feel about, for example, having a brain implant if it did certain things, or having implants in their lungs that made them breathe better, but breathe twice better than normal people, or things like that. And there was a lot of resistance, of fear about those things. Now, what has tended to happen in this country is that some of these reforms and technology have been introduced slowly within hospitals and so forth. And so people didn't see some big thing where suddenly we're not going to doctors anymore. We're just, on our Apple Watches and our things, and we're being evaluated that way. And an AI is sending us a message telling us something. It happened gradually. So people would find, well, I'm getting better treatment now. I'm getting, better results. And yeah, I guess I was concerned about the way it happened in the past, but hey, it's working. I'd be happy to offline maybe communicate with you about it, because as I say, I looked at survey information about skepticism in various countries about these new technologies and about using artificial intelligence especially. And there was a lot more resistance than I had thought. And I'd really be happy to talk. It's a little bit of a bigger conversation, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it or communicate with you about it offline, because you're right. People themselves, the patients themselves have to be invested in, I want to do what's going to help me be healthier. And so you have to convince them, you have to ease their concerns and to say, wait a minute, why would it be unethical if I can come up, or a researcher can come up with the use of an enzyme that will keep a mother from losing her baby when that baby is 3 months old. What's unethical about that? What's unethical about, for example, my mother passed away from Alzheimer's. What's unethical about coming up with some kind of a brain treatment that would have kept my mother mentally healthy as well as physical healthy to the end? What's unethical? And you can just go down the list of, looking at, I've been in rooms on Capitol Hill here in the US Congress, rooms full of individuals who've lost their children or their spouses or friends because certain kinds of medications, it took too long to approve them. And so if you want to sit in a room with those kind of people, they're going to say, no, there's nothing unethical about if my child were alive today, if my mother or my father were alive today, my brother or my sister or my friend. That's one of the ways you can to do it, is make it personal. Or for that matter, for you, to what extent do you decide you prefer to suffer and to be incapacitated, perhaps, rather than having an AI monitoring you and evaluating you in real time, using, again, a hair follicle or blood sample or urine sample or whatever, so I can keep myself from being sick? Would you prefer to simply be sick, maybe die too early, miss out on life, bring sorrow to your family, your friends? And I think if you put it personal that way, you're going to probably move a lot of people in the direction of, yes, I want the technology. I want to make sure it's safe, but I want it as soon as possible because I love life. And that's what I want. I want to be with my friends. I want to be with my family. I want to achieve. I want to enjoy. That's what separates us from everything else in this planet. So we're self-conscious beings. We can enjoy life. We can enjoy ourselves. We can enjoy the world. We can appreciate beauty. So what's unethical about that?
Thank you.
Mhm.
I
Yes,
think it
please
makes
communicate
sense.
with me. Yes, please
Okay.
communicate with me about this later.
Okay, thanks. I
Mhm.
will.
And thank you for what you're doing, by the way. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
Okay. Dr. Nancy, please close this section for us.
Sorry about that.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you.
Yep, I'm still here.
Yeah, so would want to thank you so much, Prof, for the enlightenment, especially how you differentiated between sick care system and healthcare system. You made it so clear and you brought out the differences such that it's easier to identify. And not only did you end there, you helped us with the problems that face developing a healthcare system, a true one, and what we need to look out for when we want to invest in such areas. They may sound subtle, but they are very important. And thank you so much. And we hope that the next time you are invited, you will come and help us with more of the information in your books. We love to read them so that with the information, we would try and do better. We just want to do well as the other parts of the world, just that because of lack of infrastructure and these corruption issues, it makes it difficult. But with the suggestion you gave us in going to the grassroots, talking with friends and family and at the churches level, I think we will make a headway. God bless you.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you all for being here. I mean, you're the vanguard. You're the soldiers, so to speak, who are going to transform sick care to healthcare and hopefully transform your whole systems into systems where everybody not only can be healthy, but who can prosper. There's no reason why African countries can't be at the same level of prosperity and the like of the other countries around the world. It's as I say, that's why that's one of the things I love about the United States. My mother was the daughter of Italian immigrants, and they had to come here and work on streetcars and construction so they could work their way up. We have immigrants from Ireland, we have immigrants from Israel, we have immigrants from you name the place who come to the United States because we have the liberty to do that. And I know that Africans can do it because there's so many around me right now who are doing it. And so I want to see this happening in African countries as well. It's good for everybody, good for you, good for us, good for everybody.
Good night, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. Blessings or bye.